So growing up as a kid, I started out with Final Fantasy IV, and then I pretty much played everything else Squaresoft was releasing at the time and got acquainted with RPGs through them. I loved Super Mario RPG. I got a big kick out of Chrono Trigger. I remember liking Secret of Evermore, though I haven't played it since I was a kid. And then eventually Final Fantasy III would come out, and I'd love that too. Or as it's really known, Final Fantasy VI. But wait, that's not for another month. So where'd Final Fantasy V go? Once again, this was a game that didn't make the cut and wasn't localized outside of Japan. It was also made 1 year after Final Fantasy IV, and holy moly, you gotta admire Square's insane flow of releases back in the day. The original debuted in 1987, and here we are at 1992, and the series has 5 entries, as well as a couple Game Boy games too. Slow down, Square! Anywho, the reason Final Fantasy V never came to Canada back then?
On December 6, 1992, Square releases Final Fantasy V in Japan. The game is considered too hard for American gamers, and isn't released in the US.
Yep, the only reason we never got an English version of Final Fantasy V was that apparently Squaresoft thought very little of outside audiences and assumed we'd hate how hard it is. I mean, I'm certainly going to agree that this is one of the harder Final Fantasy games, and definitely the toughest one in the retrospective so far. But come on, Square, it's not that hard. We're talking about gamers and children who are playing games in 1992. We grew up with the NES. We had Nintendo hard video games that kicked our ass on a routinely frequent basis. You think I just beat Mega Man 2 in an afternoon? Mega Man didn't take any prisoners. I grew up on Battletoads. I've got battle scars, okay? But yeah, we never got Final Fantasy V. At one point they were even thinking of localizing the game as Final Fantasy Extreme, dropping the number altogether and just packaging it as though it was a game for experts only. But that never came to fruition. I wouldn't see Final Fantasy V for a very long time. When I was in middle and high school, the libraries and computer classes had kids download a whole bunch of emulators on them. Emulators that let them play old NES, Sega Genesis, and Super Nintendo games on their computers. And it was pretty hilarious how much the teachers at my school didn't care for the most part. If you did your homework or you had free time between classes, go play Mega Man 7 on the computer. I don't care. How often I would be walking between classes, glance at the library and the computers inside, and just see a whole bunch of kids playing Super Mario World or something. Oh, my teenage years. One game the kids at school were playing back then was a translated ROM of Final Fantasy V for the Super Nintendo. And this was my first real exposure to the game. I thought it was neat. It was a game that eluded me, a companion to Final Fantasy IV and VI that I never experienced. And it was definitely something I wanted to play in my spare time. I think that was the first time I ever heard of Japanese-only games, and of fans translating them so that North Americans could play them. And play it I did, but at the time I did it with no sound or music. My computer was super crappy in the early 2000s. But eventually I'd finally be able to purchase the game for reals and listen to the audio at long last. In 1999, Squaresoft would eventually release Final Fantasy Anthology for the PlayStation. This included 2 games, Final Fantasy VI and the game of the video, Final Fantasy V. I could finally play this thing! Legally! Piracy is wrong, kids. Support the official releases. Oh, and Mother 3 is never coming to North America. You'll never play it! Live in the now! Anywho, the version I'm going to be playing for this retrospective is the PlayStation version, which I've had for years. It's not the best version, but it's the one I played most and have the most memories of. So how hard is this thing really? Well, let me tell you all about it. Our story begins in another world that's governed by the 4 elemental crystals of Earth, Wind, Water, and Fire. One day, the wind starts to diminish, which leads the king of the kingdom, Tycoon, to investigate the wind shrine where the crystal resides. Time passes, and the king doesn't return. And to make matters even worse, a meteorite comes out of nowhere and crashes nearby, attracting the attention of a lone traveler named Bartz, who's camping in the forest with his pet chocobo, Boko. Upon arriving, Bartz finds himself running into the Princess of Tycoon, a girl named Lena, as well as an old man lying unconscious next to the meteorite named Galef. Lena, concerned about her father, took off to head to the Wind Shrine by herself, and Galef unfortunately has amnesia caused by the meteorite's landing. He doesn't remember who he is, but he does remember that he also wanted to see the Wind Crystal. So the three decide to stick together, especially now that goblins and monsters are starting to appear and terrorize everyone. With the meteorite blocking their pathway, the three stumble upon a cave that's home to pirates, led by a no-nonsense pirate king named Faris. With nowhere left to go, Galuf suggests stealing their pirate ship to reach the Wind Shrine, only for everyone to get caught almost immediately. Robbing them of their goods and holding them prisoner on the ship, Faris discovers that the pendant Lena was wearing happens to be very similar to one Faris owns. Seeing a possible connection to the past, Faris decides to let everyone go and join them to the Wind Shrine. After taking out a few monsters on the way, our heroes make it to the Wind Crystal, which unfortunately could not contain itself and shattered into pieces. But upon arriving, the energy inside of the crystal flies into our four heroes. King Tycoon shows up to say that with these newly acquired powers, the four standing before him are now the Warriors of Light, and only they can rush to protect the remaining three crystals from an evil presence which looks to conquer the world and leave everything in darkness. It's a very familiar setup. Big Bad wants to corrupt the four elemental crystals. Four heroes known as the Warriors of Light have to stop them. It's the plot of 1 and 3 all over again. If you're getting tired of this story trope, I can reassure you that Final Fantasy VI onwards are a lot more original with their stories and do not rely on elemental crystals or Warriors of Light or even familiar scenery, and they do a lot better of a job being their own thing. For now, we got another classic and basic Final Fantasy setup. In fact, this setup is super familiar if you've played Final Fantasy III, and for good reason, as Final Fantasy V brings back the job system. As soon as you find the first Shattered Crystal, you can change your jobs and become a warrior, a thief, a monk, a black mage, a white mage, and of course a blue mage. Way to throw me a curveball, game. We're looking at the main four party members that you're going to be using for the majority of the game. No switching out for specific temporary guys like Final Fantasy IV, so you can focus on building characters exactly the way you want. For the most part, the job system is exactly like it was in 3. At any point, you can switch from a warrior to a black mage for very specific situations, your stats will adjust to whatever job you're using, and you'll be collecting more and more jobs with each crystal you reach. You'll find the last crystal way before the halfway point of the game, so you'll have access to 95% of the jobs for most of the adventure. For me though, what makes this game a lot more interesting to play over Final Fantasy III is the fact that now when you level up jobs, you get abilities. If you collect 10 ability points with a black mage, you will level up that job once and gain the ability to cast level 1 black magic. Now while using the black mage, we could already do that. Certain abilities are going to be there by default when you use a certain job. But the purpose of unlocking this ability isn't for the black mage job. It's for any other job you want to use. Basically this means we can attach black magic to whatever job we want. Each job has the potential to hold on to one extra ability of your choosing, so now we can mix and match qualities to develop a unique kind of fighter that we couldn't before. Maybe you want a thief who can cast black magic. Maybe you want a white mage who can wield swords. Maybe a monk who has the ability to jump into the sky like a dragoon. The possibilities are endless. So what we have here is a game that has a lot more freedom and customization than the job system in the third game. You now have an incentive to tackle numerous jobs because each level up from a job will grant you a new ability. Mastering the Knight class isn't just to get the cover features so you can protect allies. Mastering a Knight can get you a variety of things. I got 2 of my party members to level 3 Knight status because that unlocked the two-handed ability. Characters can't dual-wield weapons unless they're a ninja, so what better way to boost the attack of a red mage than by letting them be a knight for a bit and getting them the two-handed option to deal out a lot more damage than they normally would. And well, I said the ninja's the only class that can dual-wield, but not if you master the dual-wielding ability that the ninja gives! Who wouldn't want to give a melee class the ability to wield 2 of the best weapons in the game? Mages can get extra abilities to make them more competent fighters. If you want to steal great items from enemies, but want more strength than the Thief class provides, then you have a Dragoon who steals things. I mean, the options are extensive, and I remember vividly discussing with my friends about our own party setups, and finding that we all had something different going on. And that is a pretty unique experience that makes Final Fantasy V stand out among the crowd. It also introduces a ton of new class types that will stay with the series for quite a while. One of the first you get is the Blue Mage. This is a magic user who doesn't utilize Cure, or Fire, or Ice, or any of the spells that you buy in shops. Instead, it learns certain abilities from monsters that you fight in battles. So if you're fighting some bad mamma jamma who casts level 5 death magic, the blue mage will learn the ability himself, being able to cast it back on others whenever they please. Blue magic and learning enemy skills is a technique that will stay with the series from this point onwards. There's the Time Mage, who deals in speed-type spells. Final Fantasy V is still using the active time battles that were introduced in Final Fantasy IV, so this class is useful for slowing down enemies, reducing their attack rate, and speeding up everyone else in the party with haste. Haste 2 helped me so much in the game. Samurais can use money as a weapon. The more gil you decide to throw, the more damage gets done to enemies. So now with this job class, you literally can throw money at a problem to make it go away. And the last job I'll mention is the Ranger. This is a class that specializes in bows and can attack from the back row rather nicely. Unlike FF3 and 4, the bow doesn't require ammo to use, so you can use it to attack enemies as often as you want. Mastering this job gets you the ability to hit an enemy 4 times with your physical attacks, and if you combine that ability with a dual-wielded character, you hit people 8 times per turn, which nets you a lot of damage. Faris was one hell of a ninja by the end of the game. For the most part, you'll see the familiars, Red Mage, Dragoon, Bard, and I haven't even gotten into the specifics of the Mystic Knight or the Chemist class, which uses items more effectively. The point is that you have a lot of options this time around, and with the ability system, there's so much mixing and matching and experimentation that you can do to create the ultimate team that you want to create. It's a beautiful setup, and players will find a lot of depth here. In the job system, anyway. For the most part, Final Fantasy V doesn't drastically change from the usual formula we've seen up to this point. It's a linear RPG where you journey across the world map, visit towns to buy magic and equipment, and occasionally find the odd side quest or boss to face off with if you go snooping around. Practically all of the summons are optional fights this time around, so you're not just hunting for Odin, Bahamut, and Leviathan, you gotta find Shiva, and Ramu, and everyone else too before you get the most out of summoning. The story's not quite as deep as Final Fantasy IV was, but it does have a lot of fun characterization and quirks that make it stand out over all of the Famicom games. One thing I noticed right off the bat was a huge increase in humor and comic relief that the previous 4 didn't really have for the most part. The character sprites are a lot more expressive. Now when something shocking happens, their eyes bug out and you can see how freaked out they are. If Bart accomplishes something great, like becoming master at the piano, he struts his stuff and fist pumps like a champ. Characters will even visibly laugh when something silly happens. I don't really like high places. Oh, Bartz, you ignorant slut. A lot of comic relief dialogue going on here. When Bartz first agrees to help out Lena, he does so under the guise that his late father wanted him to travel the land and do the right thing, so how could he say no? To which Galuf remarks, "What a bunch of crap! You know it's just because you got the hots for her!" And Bartz brilliantly responds, "You could tell?" God damn it, Bartz. Bartz is a bit of a bonehead at first, but he's a fun main character. We learn very early that Faris the Pirate King isn't exactly everything he appears to be. One of the early gags is that Faris goes off on his own to rest up at the inn with his pirate crew, and you can check in on him in his room. Bartz and Galuf stumble upon his sleeping body to find a rather sexy revelation that leaves them love-struck. I must be seeing things. But no, they're not. Not long after, our heroes find themselves shipwrecked and navigate a cold body of water. With no option left but to strip and dry their clothes, they discover that Faris refuses because he is actually a she. Faris is a pirate queen, and when asked why Faris pretended to be a man in the first place, she reveals that she was shipwrecked as a child and taken in by pirates, but she found that nobody took her seriously as a woman. So, she reinvented herself as a man in order to command a crew. Galuf expresses how odd it is at first, and in a nice progressive turn, Bartz and Lena brush off the revelation as a non-issue. Faris is Faris, they say, and this never really becomes an issue in the game past this point. I like Faris as a character. Upon first meeting her, you'd think she was just a pirate queen out for self-interest, and only accompanied them to the Wind Shrine for the profit and glory. But as the game goes on and you get more reveals about her past, and encounter more people in distress, Faris turns out to be one of the more compassionate and noble characters in the group. Even when presented with the option to be a regular woman again at the end of the game, Faris ditches her frilly dress and makeup to return to the Pirate King garb that she's grown to love. Faris is awesome, and for a 1992 RPG, they could have easily made her the butt of jokes or go, "Oh, how weird, a woman who pretends to be a man." But they don't really do that. Faris rules. Also, she owns a pirate ship that gets pulled around by a giant sea creature known as Sildra, which makes her double rule. Faris is great. But I should mention that while I grew up with the PlayStation version, I really find the localization pretty annoying, and I think it's far worse than what the Super Nintendo version of Final Fantasy IV was like. Faris is one casualty of a really dumb decision to have all of her dialogue in ye olde pirate speak. She says yar. She says cap'n, not captain. Don't judge me because I be a woo man. Oh god. And it never ends. Even in the most serious scenes, her entire dialogue is just cartoonish pirate talk that completely kills the mood. The GBA and mobile versions of Final Fantasy V don't have this problem, and they also keep the correct terminology that would be used in every future Final Fantasy game. Even the Super Nintendo FF4 knew to call Kain a Dragoon. They didn't call him a Lancer like this version. I'm calling the Princess of Tycoon by her name in every other version, Lena. But in the PlayStation version, they decided to call her Reina instead. And you can't really change her name, you can only change Bartz's, so nothing I can do about that. The Sage Turtle, he's Gil, not Guido. How do you spell Exdeath? X-death, obviously. But the one change that always gets under my skin for no reason is calling the interdimensional rift, which is an important area in the game and will be tied to the character of Gilgamesh that I'll mention later. In the PlayStation version, they call it the End Zone. What? End Zone? This isn't a game of football here, it's supposed to be called the Interdimensional Rift. Ay. So I'm just warning you, if you decide to pick up this game on the PlayStation Network, some of the writing is going to be not great, and you might be pretty annoyed when you play through the game. Our four heroes eventually discover that the reason the crystals keep shattering is that someone is going around tampering with the machines that hold them, but in a very unconventional way. The villain of the game is possessing people's bodies and controlling them from far away to do the job. And despite the gang's best efforts, they are too late in every situation. All four of the planet's crystals break, essentially dooming everyone by slowly diminishing the power of the elements. But the crystal's destruction was also holding the villain's prison in check, and with the seal broken, the evil warlock known as Exdeath is free to return to once again terrorize and conquer everything. It's also at this point that Galuf gets his memory back and remembers that it was he who came to this planet from inside the meteorite to try and stop this revival from happening. Galuf was not born in Bartz's world. He originally came from another dimension where Exdeath tried to conquer everything once before. He and three other heroes made up the Warriors of Dawn, and they ended up chasing Exdeath to this alternate world and ended up defeating him. But for whatever reason, Exdeath would never die. He kept reviving despite their best efforts. So with no other option, the Warriors of Dawn sealed him away in Bartz's world, to be protected by the crystals and remain trapped for all eternity. But I guess they didn't count on him having out-of-body possession powers. I guess they never saw that. And so, Exdeath has returned. He's the big bad of Final Fantasy V, and unlike Xanda or Golbez, he isn't being manipulated by some greater evil. He's not being mind-controlled to be evil. He is evil incarnate. He's the final boss of the game, and you'll probably grow to hate the guy's guts as the journey goes on. Like Golbez, he's a big, scary, menacing figure in heavy armor who has a really intense theme song whenever he enters the picture. He's also apparently a Dragon Ball Z fighter since he can warp and fly around at light speed to kick all kinds of ass. He's overly powerful, seems unkillable, and he used to be a tree. No, I'm not kidding. He was originally a tree that got tainted with evil spirits and manifested into a grown man. He even tricks the party at one point by hitching a ride with them as a tree branch. I don't even know how that works, but he did it. But anywho, in order to stop Exdeath for good, our four heroes have to follow him to Galuf's dimension, where Exdeath's castle and army resides. He's looking to gain the power of the void, the space of nothingness that he could use to instill fear and devastation and help him conquer all. Which means this game has two world maps, and Galuf's world is definitely a little more dangerous than the first. So speaking of dangerous, I guess now is the time to talk about FF5's difficulty. Remember, Square thought this game was too hard for outside audiences back in '92. They considered calling it Final Fantasy Extreme, because they seemed to think they made a really hard game. And I will definitely agree that this is one of the harder numbered Final Fantasies. I don't think it's insanely brutal to the point of infamy. It's not the most intense, frustrating experience I've ever had, and I don't even think it's up there with some of the harder Shin Megami Tensei RPGs. But it is worth mentioning that some of you are gonna hate how unforgiving it can be. This is the most trial and error I've had with boss fights in a Final Fantasy game. You go into boss fights not knowing what to expect, you get squashed like a bug when they pull out some annoying counter move or they implement some kind of puzzle that makes you waste items and turns. And it's not always like that. For a good chunk of the early game, it's not throwing anything too crazy at you. Bosses like Siren, Magissa and Falzer, the Berserk Garula in the Water Shrine, they're not bad, and the random encounters surrounding them are fine too. Oh, and yeah, Garula's debuted in Final Fantasy V. You might have seen a whole bunch of these things in Final Fantasy 15. They don't attack you in this game either, so leave them alone, you jerks. I can tell you exactly when the game starts amping up in difficulty. Just before the final crystal. I fought this demon bird named Archaeovis. How do you say that? He started out fine, but when you kill it, he comes back with a second form that spams powerful attacks that drop you real quick and has the chance of brainwashing your party members and turning them against you. I hate that shit. But it just got worse from there. Because from this point onwards, boss after boss would have some kind of gimmick, some devastating attack, some little asshole move that gave me quite a bit of game overs. I fight a bunch of bombs and they can explode on somebody and instantly kill them. And at this point, Galuf disappeared for a bit, so it kinda matters when one of my party members goes down. But this isn't even the tricky part. You discover that when these bombs die, they cast full life on all of the other dead bombs, essentially bringing them back to life to go and explode on you and waste more of your health. The idea is to try and kill all of them at the exact same time so that they don't have anyone to bring back from the dead. But if you're unlucky, maybe you'll only kill 5 of the 6 bombs and then oh shit, 1 bomb survived. Guess the other 5 are coming back, and when they die, the 6th one will come back too, and well, what the fuck do I do to fix this now? Oh god! They will run out of MP after a while, but man, that fight can drag out forever when you screw it up. I fight the Earth-summoned Titan, who's mandatory to beat in the story, and the jerk has a very powerful earthquake attack. Guess what happens when you deliver the killing blow? He casts that as he dies. So if your white mage didn't have time to heal everybody since the last one he did, and your warrior kills Titan too soon, oops, you die, gotta reload your save and fight him again. Seriously, at this point, I just kept dying because bosses would always surprise me with some new annoying thing that caught me off guard. A lot of the bosses are pretty intense. If they don't enhance their abilities halfway through to throw you off guard, then there's usually some weird quirk about it. This icy boss comes in 4 forms, but the other 3 are actually imposters that counterattack you when you hit them. And there's no way to tell who the real one is unless you cast magic that hits everybody, but then he counterattacks you 3 times in the process and immediately switches who the real one is in the same turn. What a jerk! I mean, I will say that FF5 has some of the more creative boss fights in the series. A ghost lady that alternates between being alive and being undead, a sandworm that plays whack-a-mole with you and counterattacks when you miss him. Gotta use the active time battles to your advantage there. But not all of them are super hard, and veterans of Final Fantasy V are more than likely commenting on this video, telling me all of the easy strategies. And I know quite a few myself. There's this one boss named Atomos who looks like a demonic version of Kirby. He has a ridiculously powerful comet attack, which he sometimes spams more than once, pretty much guaranteeing that he's going to drop one of your party members. And when one of them is down, he starts inhaling and sucking them towards him. If he swallows a party member, then they're out of the fight. It sounds intense, and every time you Phoenix down a KO'd party member, he just starts spamming the comet spell again and ruining your good times. But in truth, he's actually one of the easiest bosses in the game. When Atomos is sucking you, he won't do anything else. He doesn't use the comet spell when one of your guys is down. He's too busy trying to have dinner. This leaves you plenty of free time. So basically, just let it happen. Lie down. let one of your members relax and get off their feet for a while. Atomos will get busy. He'll start sucking. And while this is happening, apply some haste lotion to your skin. Now you're gonna move much faster. Atomos will suck, and you'll beat him off. You'll beat him off much faster than he'll suck. And if Atomos is about to swallow, then you pull out real quick before that happens. But honestly, you should reach your climax way earlier than he will. And boom! That's all there is to it. Was it good for you? Again, it's a very trial and error game. One boss near the end of the game counters every attack I do with Tidal Wave, and it sucks because it hurts so much. But there are accessories you can wear to turn water damage into health. And if you die, you just go back into the fight with the proper equipment, and it's not really a big deal. Final Fantasy V is not nice to children. If you're not using the job system effectively, not buying the right equipment, not putting characters in the right formations, then yes, the game can be quite brutal. It doesn't let you have victory easily, and so many of the bosses are just heavy hitters who love to inflict all kinds of status effects to you. This is indeed one of the hardest games in the series, and I wouldn't recommend it to first-timers. 3 and 5 are very similar, though. They both have the job system, they both have a submarine you can drive around in to explore the underwater caverns, and it also features the return of those white fluffy Moogles that we saw in Doga's mansion. You stumble upon a Moogle village in Galif's world, and it gets a little confusing for our heroes as the only thing they say this time around is Kupo. But first off, are they Moogles? Or furries wearing cosplay outfits? In the village, you can find a Moogle costume and put it on to charm one of the other Moogles and grab an item from a chest nearby. Why is there a Moogle costume in the Moogle village? I don't think there was an NPC who explained that. So is everyone here full of shit? Are they actually people in bodysuits? Or did I put on the skin of a dead Moogle that they just hung up in one of the trees for no reason? Oh my god! Anywho, this would be the first game to introduce the Moogle theme, as they didn't have one in 3. Oh, and I guess I don't need to mention this, but the music is great. It's a Final Fantasy game. Of course the music is great. I'll be honest, I don't really play Final Fantasy V that much in comparison to the other games in the series, so I almost always forget just how good the music is in this game. But then I start playing the game again and it all comes rushing back. There's a whole bunch of new summons with a lot of great perks. Like Carbuncle, who is a summon that can cast Reflect on the entire party. Climbing the Phoenix Tower nets you the Phoenix Summon, which not only deals out fire damage to an enemy, it also brings back a party member from the dead with full health. One enemy you'll encounter is the Tonberry, a slow-walking lizard that will stab you for massive damage when he eventually catches up to you. He's a lot more terrifying than he looks. Although thank you, PlayStation version, for calling him a Dingleberry? Dingleberry? This game came out after Final Fantasy VII. How did you screw this up? But before I wrap up this video, I would be foolish not to mention the character of Gilgamesh. So Exdeath leads his own army in Galif's world, and he has a lot of minions who work for him. But his second in command is a swordsman named Gilgamesh, a bombastic, blowhard warrior who returns multiple times as a recurring boss fight. He's another one of the aspects that adds to Final Fantasy V's sense of humor. He's not a terribly serious villain. This is the kind of guy who announces halfway into a fight, "I've learned my lesson! I'm no match for you!" But then he casts Haste, Protect, and Shell on himself and goes, "Not!" When things aren't going Gilgamesh's way, he usually has an excuse or two why he's gotta leave the fight. I wouldn't classify his boss fights as cakewalks. He can be legitimately challenging sometimes, but he's always the butt of jokes, and his constant attempts to defeat the party is pretty charming. Each fight is an escalation. He starts off fighting Galif, then he fights the whole party, then he brings his sidekick friend Enkidu to help beat you, and then he reveals that he has this amazing transformation where he grows multiple arms and can wield multiple weapons. Holy crap! To add insult to injury, he searched for the legendary weapon Excalibur just to cut you down rather nicely. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh kinda screwed up. Instead of finding Excalibur, he ended up finding a fake copy that's actually called Excalibur. It's a weapon that will only do 1 HP worth of damage. Oh, Gilgamesh. The guy has some of the best lines in the game. His most memorable line is actually from the GBA version of Final Fantasy V. "Enough expository banter! Now we fight like men! And ladies who dress like men!" The guy's pretty great. Oh, and it kinda helps that he has the best theme song in the game. God, that theme's good! So our heroes take the fight to Exdeath as best as they can, getting acquainted with Galif's allies in his world. They meet his granddaughter, a girl named Creel who actually owns a pet Moogle and lives in Galif's castle. Oh, Galif is a king, by the way, did I mention that? And they even run into 2 of the other Warriors of Dawn that helped him fight Exdeath all those years ago. There's even the revelation that one of them was Drogon, Bart's late father who chose to stay in the alternate world and raise him there. Needing advice to defeat Exdeath, they consult the world's wisest sage, a talking turtle named Gil. A turtle who needs help being tipped over, but also fights like a Dragon Ball Z character. Okay. He tells the group that Exdeath is searching for something in Moor Forest, but he doesn't know what. This leads to our heroes investigating, and they find one lone tree that contains a powerful force which attacks them for entering. They successfully survive, but this turns out to be a mistake as they inadvertently help break the seal for this world's 4 elemental crystals, which were all hanging out in this one spot. And Exdeath counted on this. He springs his surprise attack and uses the crystals to attack and kill the Warriors of Light. And at this point, Galif's granddaughter arrives to try and save the day, but even she still gets caught up in Exdeath's attacks, which puts Galif in a rather desperate situation. Galif uses every ounce of his energy to overcome the crystal's magic, and he actually shatters it. He even goes one-on-one with Exdeath in one last attempt to finish him off. And it's an admirable fight where he actually does manage to weaken Exdeath enough for him to lose his power over the crystals, but at a great cost. The damage that was inflicted to Galif was far too great, and it mortally wounds him. Hey, come on, man, just throw Phoenix down on him. He'll be alright. Oh wow, they actually do try that. Guess that theory's out the window. And so, with this event, a key party member tragically dies. It's not the first instance of a playable character dying. FF2 had quite a few, and FF4 did have Tella, but I think this is the first time we had someone who players thought had plot armor. He's one of the 4 Warriors of Light. He's been with us since the beginning. How could he die? It was a pretty intense twist, and the good thing is, it doesn't invalidate all of the progress you made with him. Galif's spirit appears to his granddaughter Creel. He explains that only she can help the other 3 defeat Exdeath. and so he gives her all of the abilities that he developed along the adventure. If you've been spending time as a black mage, Creel will retain all of the stats that Galuf had. So don't worry, you don't have to start over from scratch with her. And that's why in a lot of the footage I've shown up to this point, Creel replaces Galuf in the party. After deactivating one of the towers, placing a barrier over Exdeath's castle, our heroes go in to retrieve the 3 remaining crystals and finish him off. After climbing a demonic structure and battling with Gilgamesh one more time, the fight with Exdeath commences, and after an intense battle, our heroes manage to defeat him. But even with Exdeath's death, the crystals end up shattering anyway. With all 8 crystals destroyed, this ends up merging Bartz's world with Galuf's world. Or as we discover from Gil the Sage, it returned the 2 worlds back to normal. Long ago, the 2 worlds were in fact one before 12 legendary heroes clashed with an evil force named Ennuo. Ennuo used the power of the Void to erase whatever he wished, so the crystals were separated to eliminate the Void and bring about peace. But now that the world's back together, that means the Void is back too. And guess who isn't dead? Exdeath feigned his death and hung onto the group as a tree branch, and now that the world is merged, he gains the power to control the Void. He uses it to suck up individual locations and throw them into the space between worlds, the interdimensional rift. And this puts us into endgame time now. As soon as you regroup with Lena and gain access to the airship, you can do a lot of things and you really only need to go after Exdeath and beat the game. You can climb the Phoenix Tower. You can go for the 4 lithographs to unlock the 12 legendary weapons. You can return to the Water Shrine to find 1 extra job. The Water Shrine sank underwater after the water crystal broke, so you gotta use the submarine to reach it. Once you find the crystal shard at the end, you get attacked by a master mimic named Gogo, and he won't let you through unless you can beat him. But being a mimic, Gogo will just repeat whatever you do to him back to you, and there's a time limit to fight this guy because everyone's holding their breath underwater. But the great thing about this fight is, the winning move is not to play. He's a mimic, right? He does what you do. Well, if you do nothing, he does nothing. But Gogo sees it as though you're mimicking him, and he appreciates how taken in you are with mimicry. So even though there's a scary underwater time limit, if you just wait it out for a bit and don't fight at all, then boom! You unlock the last job class, the Mimic. Mostly everything in the merged world is optional. All you gotta do is beat Exdeath. You don't need the legendary weapons, you don't need to find Odin, Leviathan, and Bahamut, you don't need to do most of what you can do here. And this changes the last third of the game into Final Fantasy I, where you have complete freedom to explore the world and the story takes a backseat to the gameplay. And this is kinda great, but I gotta admit, it wasn't as fun as it really should have been. And for me, the reason this is because the encounter rate in Final Fantasy V is really, really annoying. We've gone back to the kind of encounters that happened in Final Fantasy II. Sometimes you get out of a battle, take 3 steps, and boom, right into another battle. Since so much of the merged world is just dungeon after dungeon after dungeon after dungeon, the game got quite boring for me having to spend hours in these things because of the frequent battles. It also doesn't help that sometimes I could run from fights really easily, and then the game would just decide, you know what? We're gonna take an eternity for you to run and make you take a lot of damage. Run! Run! What are you doing? Get out of there! Holy Christ! I can't stand high encounter rates, guys, and the whole game isn't really like this. It amps up as soon as you reach more forest and then just stays that way for the rest of the game. I don't like getting disoriented with dungeons. How often I'd skip out on optional treasure chests and pathways just because I wanted to speed up the journey and get to my destination faster. And it really doesn't help that so many dungeons in 5 have trap floors that fall out as soon as you step on them and make you climb all the way back up until you trial and error the solution. Why does the float spell help me avoid lava damage in Exdeath's castle, but it doesn't avoid the pits that my characters shouldn't be stepping on? Ugh. This game doesn't flow like Final Fantasy IV did either. Oh, you're gonna grind. Whether you're grinding to enhance your levels or to get ability points to master all of the jobs, you're gonna be fighting for a very, very, very long time. Once again, thank you Squaresoft for the memory feature in the config and for letting us hold the X button down to cycle through menus easily. But yeah, folks, there's not much left to cover. I didn't mention that this game, of course, has a Cid who helps customize your airships and submarine for you. He's an old engineer who feels guilty that the contraptions he built for the crystals were used to sabotage them by Exdeath. This time around, Cid actually has an assistant in the form of his grandson, Mid. Mid helps him get over his depression and motivates Cid to fix up the fire ship so that our heroes can sail the ocean. Chocobos kind of return. You only ride 2 in the whole game. Bartz's faithful companion Boko can carry you all around the merged world, and at one point you find a black chocobo which can fly you over mountains and lands in forests. You can also ride dragons, but they can't fly over mountains, so chocobos are better than dragons, confirmed. And that's it. No new chocobos. The white and fat chocobos don't return, nor do chocobo forests. You literally use 2 specific chocobos for the entire adventure. Gilgamesh makes a last appearance in the void just before you face off with Exdeath. After bungling his last fight with you and making an ass of himself with Excalibur, Gilgamesh gets thrown into the rift as punishment for his failures. Spending time in the rift, he actually reflects on his situation and realizes Exdeath is bad news. He even grows admiration and respect for the Warriors of Light, lamenting that Galuf had to die. In the end, he actually helps our heroes battle another of Exdeath's minions. And then he just sorta disappears. Even in the epilogue, we never find out what happened to the guy. The last we see of him, he's in the interdimensional rift, and he wants to challenge Bartz to a one-on-one battle for sport. I wonder what happened to him. Come back in 3 months. I'll tell you what happened to Gilgamesh then. But yeah, after navigating all of the fragmented places that Exdeath absorbed with the Void, and fighting all of his numerous minions, the Warriors of Light finally make it to the deepest depths of the rift, where Exdeath is hiding. Becoming a big evil tree again and ready to absorb the full power of the Void, our heroes have one last showdown with big bad Exdeath. To be honest, maybe it was just my setup, but I actually managed to beat Exdeath rather easily in my first try, unlike Zeromus and the Cloud of Darkness from the previous games. He's got a lot of hit points and his Delta attack is a son of a bitch, but I always had some nice way to drain his health, speed up my party, and heal up whenever things were rough. Again, the job class system is really great. All's well that ends well, as defeating Exdeath manages to eliminate the Void and return all of the towns and castles and landmarks he absorbed. Though our heroes will never forget the brave sacrifices of Galuf and the other Warriors of Dawn, peace returns and everything turns out hunky-dory. And that's Final Fantasy V. I may have said Exdeath wasn't hard to me, but oh god, this game introduces some asshole optional bosses. In the Rift, you can find both a super powerful dragon named Shinryu, but you'll also find a walking robot known as the Omega Weapon. Omega Weapon makes Exdeath look like a chump, and there's a reason you've probably heard the term Omega Weapon, even if you haven't played every single Final Fantasy. Without the proper setup, without the stats you get from tons of level ups, this thing will just completely murder you. Final Fantasy V is also available on the Game Boy Advance, and I think this is the definitive version right now. It adds new jobs, an extra dungeon where you can face off with the villain Enuo who helped split the world into 2, and it features way better localization than the game I played. Also, one of the extra jobs can lower the encounter rate a little, so thank God for that. There is the mobile and Steam versions of Final Fantasy V as well, but ugh! Sorry, I hate to be that guy, but I hate the sprite work. Everyone has puffed out chests, and the menus are transparent and don't look great, and I just want the original Super Nintendo visuals. They have a charm to them. I don't want redesigned stuff when the original game still looks great to me. Heck, I still get a kick out of the animated backgrounds, like the airship when you climb Ronka Ruins, or the demon faces in Exdeath's castle. Final Fantasy VI actually drops the animated backgrounds, and that's disappointing because they look great here. Personally, I'm still hoping that Square Enix will make a definitive re-release which keeps the speed, sound, and visuals of the Super Famicom game, but also includes all of the extra bells and whistles that the other versions added. That would be a great version to own, and God, Square, please, please make that game. Challenge is Final Fantasy V's selling point. If you think some of the classic games in the series aren't hard enough, or that there's not enough customization, or that these games don't have a sense of humor, then this is probably the game you'll want to try out. I wouldn't recommend it for first-time RPG players, but 5 does have a focus on gameplay over story that will be appealing to a lot of gamers. Not that the characters or story in 5 are bad by any means. To be honest, it isn't a game I return to all that much. I do think the gameplay is super solid, but it is still a very grind-heavy game with an encounter rate that makes navigating the merged world a slow game to play. I still prefer playing other games in the series, so it never made it into my top 5. But I absolutely think there's tons to love here. It's a big improvement over Final Fantasy III, and I get why, just because of the job system alone, tons of people consider this the best game in the series. X2 has a job system as well, but, well, it has issues that I'll talk about when I get to it. Final Fantasy V is a fantastic game, and I would definitely recommend. So yeah, that's Final Fantasy V, folks. I'm so sorry for the lateness on this video, guys. Persona 5 took up so much of my time in April, and I had to work under a lot of pressure to get this finished. More than I expected, honestly. But I'm going to get right to work on the next game, so come back at the end of this month as I look back on a game that tons of my friends consider the best game in the series. Next up, we look at Final Fantasy VI.